May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, our God, our strength, and our Redeemer. Amen. When I visited the United Nations, there in the very front of the building was a huge sculpture based on this text. The Lord will mediate between nations and will settle international disputes. They'll hammer their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. The nation will no longer fight against nation, nor train for war anymore. That sculpture is of a sword being made into a plowshare, and it stands as a silent witness as to what could be. It was at the end of World War I that 2 minutes of silence and the act of remembrance was first instituted, lest we forget. And today there are so many people and events to remember. Most of all, we remember those who made the supreme sacrifice in defending their country, who gave their lives for others so that we could live in freedom. Scripture reminds us, greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. For these sacrifices, we owe a debt of deep gratitude. We honor them today in this community service here in Stratford. We also remember that the First World War was horrific. 10 million soldiers were killed. 20 million were wounded. 1,200 indigenous soldiers were killed. 61,000 Canadians were killed. Their heroism is remembered across our country at cenotaphs and cemeteries. We remember with deep gratitude Ypres, Vimy, and Passchendaele. Cities, towns, countryside were wrecked. Animals and wildlife died. Ordinary people who were in harm's way died. In total, including civilians, 40 million people died. The war was fought with horses, and over 8 million horses died, with countless mules and donkeys. It was said at the time that this was the war to end all wars. The League of Nations was formed so that war would be no more, but that didn't stop the next war, which was only 21 years away. The Second World War exceeded the total deaths from World War I, with 60 million people killed, or 3% of the world's population. 44,000 Canadians were killed, 55,000 were wounded. We remember them today, along with all those who have served Canada and the world in Korea, Afghanistan, peacekeeping missions around the world. We cannot be grateful enough for their courage, daring, and willingness to risk everything for the country that they loved and the freedom we enjoy. I know that many of you are afraid of what is happening to our world. The consensus among many people is that the world is in a mess. Many of you have stopped listening to the news. Just too depressing. We're all affected by the war in the Ukraine, the war in Gaza, and the Middle East cauldron. And then there's climate change. It took until early 1800 for the planet to reach its first 1 billion of human population. Now we add 1 billion every 12 to 15 years. Our impacts have been huge. Human-driven climate change is real. In the last 10 years, each year has been hotter than the year before. Planet is warming faster than the experts thought possible, with resulting increased floods, tornadoes, ocean rise, hurricanes, forest fires, drought, crop damage, and loss. and storm surges inundating coastal areas. People are on the move because it keeps on happening when they lose everything. Witness just this last week what happened to Spain when streets turned into fast-flowing rivers. Cars are upended and dumped, piled up on top of one another. People lost their homes. People died in underground parking lots. Oh yes, climate change is real. 10,000 years ago, 99% of the planet was inhabited by wild animals. Today, it's 1%. 10,000 years ago, we were 1%. Today, we're 32%, with 67% of the planet in livestock. Our population continues to grow. We're adding 80 million people a year. The more people there are, the harder it is to protect against pandemics. Getting vaccines into millions of people's arms, billions of people's arms, is a logistical nightmare. Refugees are now 122.6 million people, coming primarily from 5 countries: Syria, Venezuela, Ukraine, and Afghanistan, all ruled by dictatorships or wars started by dictatorships. So you ask me, well, David, in the midst of all of this, where is the hope? Well, the good news is, there's a lot of people who get up every day across the world, who get up every day to make the world a better place. Some of them are seated here before you. All of you are part of that. If you want to see what's happening about climate change, get on the net. Have a look at all the people working on climate change. It is absolutely staggering. Our veterans told us that we weren't to break faith with those who died, or they wouldn't sleep in Flanders fields. The great generation came out of World War II. They built schools, the United Nations, infrastructure, and world institutions like NATO, which have made immense contributions to the world. They didn't break faith with those who died. People all across the world get up each morning to carry on a great generation's work because they remember with gratitude the sacrifices that were made for them. Our vets returned to Stratford. I met many of them who are now gone. They built our churches. They volunteered at service clubs. They didn't forget their comrades who died. They decided to do all that they could to make a difference in this community on behalf of those who were no longer able to do so. We're in the midst of bloody conflicts once more. Where does the hope lie there? Well, I came across an article in the Beacon Herald some time ago, written by Gwyn Dyer. In it, he stated that democracies don't go to war with each other. Rather, dictatorships and the far right start wars. And then to preserve freedom, democracies have to get involved to stop the aggression. The hope, then, is to try to strengthen democracy and reform it where it needs it. 1968, the Presbyterian Church committed itself to be not only a reformed church, but an ever, always reforming church. Semper Reformanda was the cry. Today, as the Ukrainian president has pointed out, the UN needs reformation. It won't do for a member of the Security Council to break UN resolutions with no penalty and use the veto more than any other nation to get away with whatever it likes. Democracies also need ongoing reformation. The opposition and the ruling parties need to assess legislation on the merits and to strive to cooperate together. I remember being in California and approaching a man on an issue who was an elected member of the California Senate. And he said to me, "David, you don't really think that issues are settled on the merits, do you?" Well, you know, naively enough, I did. but since I've come to agree with him. You know, the Catholic Church needs reformation in order to better include women. There was once again another failure to allow women to be deacons. The American democracy needs to be reformed, getting rid of the filibuster and the partisan appointment of court judges. Judges need to be appointed by a nonpartisan body who assess skills based on their knowledge of the law and the Constitution. Semper Reformanda would improve the world for millions. But the world being what it is, to every good action, there's a dark reaction. It's an interesting new film called The Apprentice. In that film is the playbook used by Trump on a young man, which he manifestly still uses today without apology, because he has found that immorality drives wild success. Here's the playbook. 1, attack, attack, attack. 2, admit nothing, deny everything. 3, no matter what happens, no matter what they say about you, no matter how beaten down you are, you claim victory, you never admit defeat. If you want to win, that's how you win. The 5 countries that are creating the most refugees are all totalitarian. The countries that are causing wars are all totalitarian dictatorships. When questioned, they attack. They lie constantly. They deny everything. They never admit that they're wrong. They stifle dissent, always claim victory when they are clearly defeated. Witness Trump's false claim with no evidence that the American election was stolen, or Putin's claim that he had no intention of invading the Ukraine. I excerpt a quote from that time period. This is what it said. As Russia amassed troops on the Ukrainian border, Russian President Vladimir Putin, his spokesman Dmitry Peskov, and other Russian officials repeatedly denied that their country had plans to invade Ukraine. They blamed the US, Ukraine, and others for the tension, insisting that Russia is, quote, a peaceful country and that it's not going to attack anyone. The playbook: deny, deflect, mislead. This playbook was pursued by Hitler in a sophisticated democracy. It's used in Russia by Putin and Xi Jinping in China. Lies and denials are standard operating procedures. The truth is far away and suppressed. The media in those states is silenced and controlled. And this, of course, it's a propaganda machine also operating by the playbook. So where is the hope? Jesus told us to be as wise as serpents and as harmless as doves. We must not break faith with those who died for freedom. We need to fact check. We need freedom of the press. We need to value the truth, as Solzhenitsyn once wrote. The simple step of a courageous individual is not to take part in the lie. One word of truth outweighs the world. Jesus said, the truth shall make you free. If we're to be faithful to those who died and those who continue to die, we need to educate our young. We need to teach that morality, truth, telling, compassion, and love are the way forward. You know, I've always believed that confusion was a bad thing. But there's a kind of confusion that I think that the historical Jesus would rather enjoy. The Palestinian conflict has dragged on since the early 1950s. In 2003, some Palestinian women and Israeli women met in session in Oslo, Norway. The Palestinian women said they supported the Israelis' right to an independent state. Israeli women said that they supported the Palestinian right to resources, political integrity, and freedom to live in the land. It was short of a two-state solution, but it was a very significant political moment. On the last day of that conference, one Israeli woman and one Palestinian woman wanted to continue the discussion, asking questions about what had been lost and what might be gained. if the two people were to live together well. And so they went out for coffee together. When it came time to leave, the much older Israeli woman decided that she'd walk the younger Palestinian woman back to her hotel. But the Palestinian woman, after they got there, realizing the distance that the older woman would have to walk back, offered to walk her back halfway. "I've had a wonderful night," the Israeli woman said as they parted. "The time with you was worth the entire conference." And the young woman went silent for a moment. "I'm glad for you," she said, "but I'm confused." The Israeli woman winced inside. "Why? What's wrong?" she asked. "Oh, nothing is wrong," the younger woman said. "I'm just confused. I don't know what to do now that my enemy has become my friend." Oh, that the world would find such delightful confusion.